Okay, so in this video, we're going to continue our discussion. We've been kind of collectively telling you about the dev environment, teaching you how this thing works, teaching you how VS Code works with live server, showing you how to look at files. So now we're going to continue on, this time talking a little more about the HTML. And one of the things I want to show you, it's kind of cool to understand some of like the ideas around what we're doing and not just the actual tags themselves, although they're really good to know. Okay, so let's first start with the tags. Okay, so what you're going to end up doing is taking some notes over in here. So I'll go ahead and give you, right? We'll do that. And then I'm not going to do it, you'll do it as we go through it. Okay, so again, VS Code through Emmet actually created this structure for us. Now we wrote some code. We wrote some, in this case, we call them tags, or you could also you may have heard them called elements. But we didn't really talk about anything about them. So the doc type in this case just tells the whatever's opening this, which generally is a browser, but gosh knows there's other ways that we can look at HTML files, but typically the way we do it is in a browser. But what this indicates when something is reading the file is telling it, here's my document type. Okay, and so notice in this case it's a standalone, okay, a self-closing tag. In a sense, it's not completely that, but it's a single tag. And when I say that, is that's opposed to something like the HTML tag that has an opening, and then here's a term I'm going to make sure you get is an attribute. And actually, this had an attribute because we could actually have other document types. So here we have the tag, okay, and then the attribute. Now, in terms of the HTML, notice how we have a HTML at the beginning, HTML at the end. So everything in your document, except for this doc type, is inside. It's nested inside of an HTML. Okay? So in this case, we're telling it the language you're using. Now, you can't really just change this to be Spanish and it translates. There's other ways to do that. It might. Actually, I don't think it does, but we could play around with that. So this, again, we have a nested, everything else inside of that HTML, that beginning tag, and the ending tag. And the ending tag is the forward slash. So anytime we have a beginning tag and an ending tag, the ending tag has a forward slash and then the regular syntax for a tag, right? So now in the head section, this is a particular section where we can give it some more information. So we say, okay, this is a meta. Meta is a way we give metadata. Metadata is really important because it's a way we say a lot more about what is in the file. So this is telling it the character set. So UTF-8, we'll actually have a discussion about UTF-8, because it's the most widely used character set for not only HTML but other ones as well. As a matter of fact, notice how I was just hanging out there for a second and you get all this content from VS Code telling you about what this means. Okay, but it basically metadata. Now we have another meta tag, so you can have more than one meta tag, which you will. You'll see this. We'll learn more about this in. And actually, that's something I need to talk about, is that we're just getting an introduction. Hopefully you're taking CIT85. We cover this in a lot more detail. So in this case, we have, like I said before, we have the tag, and then we have an attribute, okay? And so the attribute then has a value, okay? So attribute name, attribute content, and in this case we have viewport, and viewport is really saying something about how we're viewing it, the port through which we're viewing it. So the browser maybe resolution, because imagine on mobile it should look different as it would on a desktop, but it's basically just setting some initial values. And then title, we looked at this earlier, right? So we set this up and I even showed you where to find it. And so at least for our example, that's all that we have in the head section. There are other things that are going to go in there. You'll learn them as we go through. So opening tag, ending tag, and now we have the body. So this is where all the content for the page is placed, okay, within the body tag. Because I don't call this the body, this is the tab title itself. Now, it doesn't have to be tab, this could be standalone. Oh, I accidentally hit that in there, okay. So the body tag is opening and closing, doesn't have any attributes. It could, definitely could. And then we have the code that we wrote, okay. So this is great. This is at least having this in there, which, by the way, the other thing I want to show you about the browser, or sorry, about VS Code, is it also gives you the ability, like we saw on the folder, to roll things up. And so if I didn't want to look at the head because I'm like, okay, it's just getting in the way, there's too much here, I could roll that up and then I'd get these three little dots. And I could do the same for the body. And that's really good because we want to understand that there are times, and especially when we get into Bootstrap and templates, where there's going to be a lot of code here. I mean, a lot, okay? So being able to kind of roll things up and notice how now I rolled the HTML up, it rolled everything inside of it up as well. Okay, now, the reason I'm telling you all this, and by the way, again, you should be taking notes here, is to understand the structure. But I also want to tell you something kind of, I think, interesting. Okay, so let's move over now to the output here. And I'm going to have you do something which we've already done, which is I'm going to get you into DevTools. And remember, DevTools, right-click, hit Inspect. Now, if you're using a different browser, there has an equivalent as well. And so here, what you can see is that what we wrote in our HTML kind of looks like what's here, but there's actually some other stuff in here. Like, notice that code injection by live server. So live server injects something in the script. And this is really what it injected in order to do what we call live reload as well. And what's live reload? Like if I was to come over here and I was to say another, let's say H2 live reload. When I come back, live reload automatically reloads. Now, what does that mean to reload? So in this case, oh, you know what? I just realized there's something I haven't talked about. This is the reload button, the refresh button, but live server gives us that functionality. And I just realized something I haven't said, which is the autosave. Okay, and I wonder if that's going to cause some of you some challenges, and it may, because I haven't talked about it till now, and I generally have. So what I'll end up doing is talking about that in the attendance for this week because it's so important. So I'm glad I at least noticed it here because it's something that after you turn it on, you just forget. So what will happen is if you don't have it on before you do your commits and all that, you will have to have done file save, okay? Which to me is like unnecessary. Just let it save as I go. Now it doesn't complete the Git workflow for you, but it does save it into your, like here, let's just show you. You've already seen this probably. But if I was to say blah, 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 notice this little dot up there is basically telling me that that file hasn't been saved. And the reason I like live or auto save is it automatically saves for me. Now, as soon as I do any other changes, it automatically saves for me. So the VS Code is saving for me, and then the live server is saving for me as well. And you're going to learn a lot in this program about DevTools. You'll use it for this class, you'll use it for 85 if you're taking 85, and you will definitely use it for 93, which is JavaScript. Okay? Okay, so the reason I kind of like the thing I want to end with today and kind of let us move on to the next Thursday night item, because I think at least this is a good introduction at this point, is now that we're over here, okay, and we've auto-saved, right, I'm going to have you do this. I'm going to have you copy all that, and this will be weird. I'm going to do Control X or delete. Now, interesting, we'll come back to this in a minute. You get an error here if you're running live server. I'm going to come back here. And the reason I'm showing you this is if you sent no HTML in the index.html, the browser itself would actually create that structure, because it needs that structure in order to, at minimum. So this tells us at minimum, when we load HTML documents .html, right, into the browser, it has to have this structure, so that if we don't give it that structure, it's just going to create it for us, which is one of the things the browser does. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to do undo. Okay, undo if you don't know that. Okay, undo right here. For me, it was Control Z. Okay. Okay. A couple things I just realized I have not talked about is why we call it the index. Okay. And there's a lot of okay, it's a standard that whenever your main page for whatever you're creating, so like we're going to be creating websites, your what we might term homepage or your beginning page could be something else, but 95% of the time it's going to be called index.html or index.js or something else. But most of the time it's index.html. And so let me show you a little trick about that. Is if, and actually at this point we should now, my live reload should have saved. For some reason it didn't. And by the way, this is the other thing, is if for some reason you didn't see it, just hit refresh and then it should come back. But live server should have done that, and probably it didn't because it didn't have anything to build and it didn't know where to put the script or something like that. Could have been the reason why. Where was I going with this? Okay, so here's what I wanted to show you. If we, in the URL, got rid of at the end of the, again, I've shown you live server, that's the IP folder, my pub, my lecture, and my CSS. If I get rid of the index.html, my local system still pulls up the index.html because it is the default, right? So that's what I want to see in your notes. It's the default that, and in this case, because we're actually running a server locally, right? GitHub is a server for us as well, and there's many other ways to run servers. We're running right now we're running the client, but we're also running the server. So this idea of client server is an important concept to understand, okay? But in this case, more than anything, I just want to show you that, and this will happen also when you're giving URLs, that you don't have to specify the index, okay? But, oh, and by the way, there was one other thing I wanted to show you, and you don't have to do this, but let me just show you what it was. Over here, my live server said, hey, right? Live reload, see, that actually explains the error I got a minute ago, is not possible without a head and a body tag. So that's totally cool that I got that message. Live server's telling me, listen, you can't do that. Because I don't work, I need those things in there. But we also know the browser itself will just handle that for us. Okay, so in this lesson, again, we're about 13 minutes, so I'm going to end it here, and we'll end this particular lecture here. But more than anything, right, so I want you to, in your markdown file, you have some notes here. So the last thing I want you to tell me, right, is your thoughts here, right? Like how much of, like, actually, maybe this would be one of the thoughts, like how much your thoughts, right? Like how much of this did you know? How much of this, like as a percentage, like did you know all this stuff I covered today? Did you know 50% of this? Did you know 75? Did you know none of it? It's all good. It's just from my understanding, and I like to see that. Or is there any other feedback that you would have for me here? All right, so you'll have one last commit. This commit at the end will be, right, and we'll actually just call it that. It'll be, and I'm not going to do it. You now know how to do the Git workflow. So your job is to do the Git workflow. The commit message is notes about HTML, okay? Notes about HTML will be that last commit message. And then what you will do, right, is once you're done there, and once you've done your git add and your git commit, then you'll do your git push. Now I haven't got that last commit in there, but remember, git add, git commit, git push, and go. So what you're going to get ready to do here, and I'm going to go back to the browser. I'm going to refresh this because it should have, and you go into this subdirectory. Okay, so then here's your commits. So then this is the URL, like I showed you last week, that you will submit, right? This will be how you show me you completed this work. All right, we'll move on to the Thursday night item.